sometimes when I'm making videos, they go off at a weird tangent. This is such a video. Now, the plan was to make a video about how my pre-Dungeons and Dragons games were nurtured and developed, I suppose, by the games I'd been playing before Dungeons and Dragons. And I was searching through some materials to inspire me. I found these. I found that, look, an RAF oil tanker. I found that. A Vulcan bomber, dinky. It's had a bad time, it's lost its wheels. I found that. A cannon that fires matchsticks. We used to use those to shoot at our airfix soldiers. Now, that's not the point of this, because the point of this is I also found, and bear with me a sec, sometimes when I do videos, you must look at them and think, we was lucky back in the 70s, those massive armies he had. Well, I didn't have them. The massive armies I've got now are because I've acquired figures. I mean, when you could buy a box of airfix soldiers, you got like, what, 48, I think? You might get 48 bits. Some of them had several components, but generally 48 was the number. When I went on to metal figures, I was lucky if I could afford 3 a week. And even when I got to 16 and I'd had a Saturday job, by the time I'd put some money aside for college, and I'd planned my expenses for the week, I didn't have an awful lot left to spend on figures. I had more than I had before, don't get me wrong. I think the biggest purchase I made in the early 70s was the War Games Club in Doncaster had a fair where other manufacturers came. That was quite rare in those days. I know it's not now, but in those days that was really quite rare. And I couldn't go because it was on a Saturday at Elmfield House Youth Club. But a friend of mine, he could go. So I gave him some money and he got me 10 miniature figurines elf archers. Generally my army was small, and that's the point. I didn't have anyway. Generally I would say teenagers and young people my age in the 70s did not have huge, great rolling armies. And I shall show you what I kept my army in. Now, nowadays you get fancy cases, don't you? Big boxes and things that clip. This is what I had. That is a tin, it's an old biscuit tin. And my mum used to keep her handkerchiefs in it. And she gave it to me. The hinges broke. Oh, if you compare that, look, I'll show you. That's the figure, that's the thing. This is a figure. I didn't have a lot of figures. My entire army, good, bad and indifferent, fitted in that. That was it. That was my box. I left it on a bus once. I was coming back from the club and we used to go on the back seat of the bus. And I got home, all happy, and I was hanging my coat up and I thought, something's wrong. What is it? And it was that I'd left my biscuit tin on the bus, and it was about 10 o'clock at night, so there's no way of getting any information at that point. So the next day while I was at school, a nervous wreck if I'm being honest, my grandmother, good old grandma, phoned up the bus station and said, "You haven't got a blue biscuit tin, have you, on your back seat?" And the bloke said, "Yeah." And he said, "What's in it?" And she said, "Little soldiers." And he went, "Oh yeah, it's here." So she had to scuttle off to the bus depot and pick up my soldiers. I came home from school and there was great rejoicing. We'd also, by that time, started to play more skirmish games. I was using Bill Lamming's rules. Bill Lamming, if you don't know Bill, is from Hull. There's some cracking stories about Bill. He was in court, apparently, and some minor driving offence. And on his passport, he'd written alchemist as a profession. And the magistrate said, what do you mean, alchemist? He said, well, I take a base metal, lead, and I turn it into miniature figures and sell them, thereby turning it into gold. I hope that's true. The thing about Bill's rules, they were very medieval, but they were based around a lord, a viscount, and he had barons, and everyone had a certain number of troops they could command. And with his rules, you could develop worlds, because you could work out whether there was a quarry in your area and how much stone it produced and how many civilians you needed. So that was happening in the early 70s. And then you got like Donald Featherstone's rules. He had a really good book about skirmish rules. And one of the sections was using Robin Hood's Airfix men and the Sheriff of Nottingham's men and the little castle you could get, and fighting a skirmish battle. And that was new. But there was a lot of pushback from formal wargamers. People who thought you could only really have historical, big, proper, massive games. And they didn't like it. They certainly didn't like you using plastic figures. That was a big no-no. They didn't like different scales. Everything had to be 25mm. Everything had to have a historical precedent, which meant we were forced to play our games without them. We split. I became a fantasy gamer rather than a historical gamer. And if I'm honest, that's always been where my heart lay. One of the games my middle brother and I used to play, which was fun, and this is long before Dungeons and Dragons. We had his bed and my bed in the same room, because we had a baby brother. So his bed, my bed, and in between was a table, like a dining table. Length of the beds, and probably 3-4 foot wide. And we would put cloth on it, and using wool and sticky tape, we gridded it into foot square grids. And he started in one corner with one figure, and I started in the other corner with one figure. And they were medieval knights. And we gave them names. And we diced for what terrain features are in the square you're in. And we only did one, because they were only a foot square, these things. So it might be a hill, it might be a wood. Then, is the area occupied? And by whom? And again, we'd throw a dice. And it depended on the figures we had. We had a troll, we had goblins, we had elves, we had humans, we had some clerics, so we diced to see if there was a monastery there. We didn't have a castle or anything fancy. We had, my little baby brother used to have like formula milk, SMA milk, and it came in a tin, big round tin. And we used to paint the tins black and then put red windows and doors on them. That was, so we could have a tower as a fortification. And we had rivers that we made out of that foil you wrap your turkey in at Christmas. Or people who've just run the marathon, they get wrapped in it, don't they? Sit there like oven-ready turkeys. I'm sure there's a reason for that. I don't know what it is. So there might be water. And if there was water in our square, we made it carry on into the corresponding square, because it wouldn't just stop. And if there was a road, we put a bridge on it. Sometimes the bridge wasn't very dramatic. It might just be a playing card or some dominoes. We didn't. This wasn't fancy scenery. And then you had to throw to see what the people in the square think of you. One or two, they hate you. 3 or 4, yeah, you're right. Whatever. 5 or 6, they liked you. But we played it a lot. But the game I remember, my monk caught plague In every time you went into it, you do all the dice rolls, and then we would write down on little bits of paper all the different things we could imagine happening in a medieval world. And then we'd have a lot of blank ones, some good ones, some not so good. And we'd put them in the squares. And if you went in that square, you had to open it. And if you owned it, you had to deal with the problem. Now, so if I went into a square with goblins in it, I went, oh, there's hundreds, run away! That was okay. I could go back where I came from. But if I opened that bit of paper, which could be some great treasure or an ally, once I open that bit of paper, I'm stuck with it. Right. So I opened this bit of paper, plague. Ooh, trapped. And we had this system where there weren't hit points. We didn't know anything about hit points. We said a figure is at 100%, so we called that 100 points. And then every day that he didn't sort himself out, he threw dice to see how poorly he was. And on the first day, it was a D6. On the second day, because he was getting worse, it was 2 D6, and then 3, and so on, and so on. Well, this guy, I mean, the only way within the rules he could get cured was to find a monastery with healing clerics in it. And there weren't any on. So I spent going all around losing health, trying to find clerics on this diminishing sized table. I didn't do it. I died on a beach. Death didn't even appear to ask me if I wanted a game of chess. It was an outrage. Yeah, that was pretty grim. I remember my brother once, one of his famous deaths, he ended up being chased by every goblin we owned. It was about 17 goblins and his knight. And they chased him all around the board. But as they chased him, he kept going into squares and opening the bit of paper to try and make it better. This might be knights who are friendly. Oh, it's trolls. Ah! Oh, so many. So, do they like me? No, do they heck? And they were all joining together. This swarm following him all around the board. So that was, that's not a role play proper, is it? But that's what we were doing. Now, this all meant small numbers of figures that we could afford. Growing choice. The catalogues, certainly miniature figurines, which was the one I used to get. It moved away from Tolkien and it became sword and sorcery. And it had things like a mouth on legs, big pair of lips with legs and boots on. I always wish I'd bought one of them. They started to make supernatural type figures, horror. This is, don't laugh, this is one of the very first ghost undead Barrow White figures you could buy. It's basically a bloke with a sheet on his head going, ooh. I still use him. Well, I've got two. They still are going to appear occasionally in dungeons, because I'd like to see how young modern chaps and chapesses react to that as a horrific thing. But it meant that we could start to get more interesting things in the game. So when Dungeons and Dragons appeared, we saw that it didn't take a lot of figures to play it. We also had, and my brother was telling me what they were called the other day and I've forgotten. You could get a piece of A4 cards they were, and they were all different characters and monsters, and you popped them out. In our early games, because we didn't have many goblins and all, we used ants. We had all these little cards with ants on. What were they called? Tell me what they were called. Put it on record. My brother keeps telling me, and I keep forgetting. But yeah, a number of times people were eaten by ants. It was ridiculous. I was going to really do my head in now, not remembering what they were called. But we used them all the time. So the Dungeons and Dragons comes along, and we start to add figures that we've not got that's written down there. I don't know what a bugbear is. I don't know what a knoll is. In the first modules, they were in the glossary, they were telling you what stalactites were and alchemists. That's the level of ignorance we were at generally. So we didn't have the things that they wanted us to have. They used to introduce 2, 3, 4 new non-player character monster type creatures in every module, and they'd be listed. These are the new creatures. I remember I had before Dungeons and Dragons, I had a Tolkien bestiary. Big monster of a book it was. There was no AI, there was no flicking through your phone, there was no going on YouTube. You knew what you knew, or you went to the library, or you got a magazine, or someone in your circle knew it as well. But it made us ready for when Dungeons and Dragons came along. We were sort of prepared mentally, spiritually. we were ready. We got the figures. We've got a diversity of figures because we've got Ralpartha, we've got Grenadier, we've got Hinchcliffe, we've got miniature figurines. They're all making fantasy figures now. We've got different ways of playing tiny little games. All our armies used to get carried around in things like this. And that's big enough to put figures in for a couple of hours of an evening module of a dungeon. And it wasn't big enough to put in a 25mm French Napoleonic army. Anyway, so that's really it. I hope you're enjoying this sort of stuff. It's a bit of a ramble, I know. Tell me what you were doing. Or don't. It's up to you, isn't it? Ta-ra, Chuck.